Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we have the meta snapshot for patch 13.3. Couple ways to approach the patch. It's actually like pretty flexible. I hate to admit it sometimes, but right now I'd say there's like a bunch of different comps you could go for, but I think right now the two best comps by far are going to be Experiment Twitch and Urgot ReRoll. Another version of Twitch is going to be the Bruiser Mundo build, but you could actually play Bruiser Twitch without the Bruiser emblem. Obviously, it's not going to be as good, but it's still a very solid stuff if you don't have the emblem, because we can't always handpick our emblems. Scrap Corki going to be another option. Enforcer Vi. If I could handpick my emblem, I'd probably go for Enforcer most of the time, because Enforcer comp right now is so good. Heimerdinger Corki Flex is going to round out the S tier. This is just like another comp you could just hard force every single game. And it does a lot of different units you could flex in and out, which we'll talk about in just a bit. We're going to be going over most of these comps. In the A tier, we have Ambushers. I love this comp a lot. Echo's really fun to play, but it is really reliant on that. Or you could also play the reroll Camille version, also very nice. Dominators, I used to be a big fan of this comp, but it's a lot worse now because everyone's taking your Mundos when they play Twitch, so that could be very annoying. After that, we have more emblem comps from Sorcerer and Rebel Zoe, Emissary, Ambessa, Corki. If I ever get a really good rich game where I get like a really nice fast 8, billions and billions of gold, I'll go for the Ambessa Corki comp, because if you do not hit all the 4 Emissary units, which are Nami, Tristana, Garen, and Ambessa, you're going to have a rough because you will not get the Emissary bonus. So I only play this if I have a ton of gold during my level 8 roll down, but I love it a lot. Nocturne reroll is going to follow that with the artifact items. If you get great artifacts, Nocturne reroll is going to be for you. Form Swapper Gangplank. This is one of those reroll comps that are pretty solid, especially if you get Jace and stuff. Zeri ReRoll, this is a new comp that I added. It's okay. A lot of people are going to be playing it because it's new, and new comps are always overrated. It is fun to play, and it is good. It does have its place in the meta, but I wouldn't like just hard force this every single game, which I've seen some people do just because it was like the new kid on the block. Conqueror only do in specific spots. These other two comps, they can be played if you have nothing better to do. And then Chem and Cashout is still viable. I overreacted last week by putting it much lower. It's just kind of the same thing from before, but more difficult to do, but still viable. Before it was like way too good. Now it's just like decent, you know? But I'd say if you're a better player, Chem Baron's going to be much easier to play. And if you're a bad player, Chem Baron's going to be much more difficult to play. I think that's kind of the secret behind this comp. But that pretty much rounds out the comps in the meta. You can check out the full list on the website, bunnymuffins.lol/meta. But let's get into how to play each and every one of these. So Experiment Twitch, you got a lot of different versions here. We have the normal experiment thing, which you see here. Vi is a great emblem holder, so is Elise, depending on who you get. We have 9 units on the board right now. If you get Experiment Emblem, you could drop Zyra. You could also go 7 experiments if you hit Warwick. That's going to be a really nice power spike. For most regular games, though, if you're worried about your anomaly, either put it on Mundo or Twitch. I actually prefer Mundo to get some more tankiness. It allows your Rage Blade to stack up a bit more, but if you get some insane anomaly for Twitch, such as, like, I think it's called Dragon Soul, it's the one where each time you attack a new champion, it deals a % of their max health. I'm mainly focused on getting just some generic tank anomaly on Mundo, but in general, with 4-cost comps, you don't want to roll too hard for a specific anomaly. You'd rather save up your gold, go level 9, add in more units, add in some legendaries, things like that. But there are a lot of different units that kind of play in this build. So we see right now in the base comp, it's pretty much just 5 experiment plus whatever. Elise is popular because she's a bruiser. Vi is popular because she's a pit fighter and just like a solid tank overall. If you haven't noticed yet, you want a lot of tank units in this build because, again, you want to stack up the Rage Blade on your Twitch. Mordekaiser's a potential legendary to include. Other legendaries that you could fit in is going to be something like Caitlyn for sniper. Play Zeri or Kogmaw beforehand, doesn't really matter who. I prefer Zeri though. And then you could also run Jace if you're running Elise, and you could backline him or frontline him depending on what items you can put on him. But sometimes I am just putting him in the front line because, again, I really like having a bunch of tanks in this comp. So you got like a ton of different options to choose from here. Savika can also work instead of Vi. But that's why you want to save your gold during the anomaly round, because getting to level 9, getting like a full legendary board is going to do much more wonders than having like an absolutely perfect anomaly. And that's pretty much the gist of this comp. Standard leveling, of course, and items, just generic tank items on Mundo for Twitch, Rage Blade, Infinity Edge, plus whatever. And if you want to learn a little more, check out the Explorer tool on the site. It'll bring you a lot of different data you could kind of look up. You could do like, oh, how does Twitch do with 3 experiment? How does he do with 5? How does it do at each and every rating? How does he do with different item combinations, different traits, different unit combinations, and pretty much just get a lot of info that you normally wouldn't see. Next build up we have is Urgot Tristana reroll. Classic 2-cost reroll. It's pretty much an augment check. You really need Unleash the Beast, but if you do get this, like the comp is just hard force it, you will not regret it, and you'll probably like do really well in a lot of games. But you could also go for this if you get like Starry Night, anything of that nature, or just like a ton of Urgots at the start of the game, or like a ton of Tristanas. You could kind of play it. 4 Artillerists is generally what people go, but you could also do 2 Artillerists and play some other stuff instead. But pretty much you just need a tank and a DPS unit, and Urgot is going to be your main tank, and then oftentimes it's going to be Tristana in the back, so it's nothing too complicated there. There's also some Sentinel version that you could go for, but the 4 Artillerist one is going to be much more popular. Very simple 2-cost reroll comp, not too much else to say other than if you get very specific starts, you can just hard force this comp and do really well with it. Next build up we have is Bruiser Mundo. He's another variation of the Twitch comp. Obviously, if you get Bruiser Emblem, you could play it on your Mundo. It's going to be absolutely fantastic because he pretty much doesn't die when he has this combo, plus 2 other tank items, of course. Same build for Twitch in the backline, just Rageblade, Infinity Edge, plus something else. I like Red Buff a lot because he AoEs, so then they can't heal back up for some reason, while he takes his sweet time killing everything. But as I said before, you could also play this without having the Bruiser Emblem. You just replace Silco to add in another Bruiser. And it's a pretty good budget board to get into some late game crazy legendary comps. So a lot of times like people look at comps and they're like, oh, like this should be my final board or whatever, right? But that's often not the case. Sometimes you could use a lot of these comps to just get you to the late game. And pretty much like a lot of times you could see like a budget comp with a lot of 1-cost. Like if you took out Silco and added in Trundle for 6 Bruiser without the emblem, you obviously don't want to be playing Trundle and Steb in the late game. But you can use that to kind of pivot into like the legendary experiment build that we saw before, or anything else that you see fit. But this plays very similarly to the other Twitch comp. I like the Anomaly on Mundo if I have the Bruiser emblem, but of course like Twitch can use some pretty nice stuff as well. Oh, this build also works really well with the Frying Pan emblem, because you just build a lot of HP on your units, and the pan builds a Bruiser emblem, so your frontline just gets insanely tanky. But next build up we have is Scrap Corki. I guess all the Corki builds can kind of be linked together, right? But this build is nice because you can use pretty much any item component. Corki's really flexible on his items too. And right now it looks a little weird because when you have 6 scrap, you unlock what's called lucky items. So you pretty much always get good items, and like people figured out that putting a belt on your Corki gives you Guard Breaker every time, which is a very good item, and it's just a guarantee. It's the only thing that could come out of belt. I don't know if they're going to change that later or something, but it's a nice little strategy that you could kind of make use of. But if you're like 4 scrap, go for like a sword on Corki. Like as you're building Infinity Edge or Last Whisper, like sword or bow are going to be great scrap components on Corki before you get to 6. And of course, whenever you are playing scrap, getting as many item components as possible is going to make them a lot better because they gain a shield based on how many components you have. So you want to get like a lot of item augments because it just makes your team so much more powerful. My favorite one's going to be Belt Overflow because it just solidifies your front line really well. But playing Corki plus Echo as the 2 carries, Alawi as main tank, Elise utility tank, Rumble as like late game insurance, can't really go too wrong there. As for going Tristana or Urgot, Urgot gives you Pit Fighter for your Gangplank, but unless you have a ton of items on Gangplank, you don't really want the Pit Fighter. I'd rather have the Emissary buff from Tristana, so that's one little personal choice there. Of course, you could do whatever you want, like it's a free world after all, at least for most people. But below, I also do have a bunch of other item recommendations for the scrap components. The stuff in bold indicates without lucky items, whereas like the first option I think is going to be preferred for the lucky ones. But of course, like just put whatever item components you have, because getting a mediocre scrap item is better than getting no scrap item at all. Next one up we have is Enforcer Vi and Catilyn. This one's going to be a vertical comp, which means that you go for a very deep trait, so you go like all in on one trait, like 8 Enforcer or like 6 scraps, another example of a vertical comp. We went pretty deep into that, but 8 Enforcer is going to be a little bit difficult to hit because you need Enforcer +1 from the emblem, or like the item here that we see on Savika, and you need to hit Catilyn, and Caitlyn's a very crucial unit, and the comp does not perform that well without her. But in the meantime, you could play Vi. So what you can do sometimes is even play 6 Enforcer and flex between this and the Ambessa Emissary comp. That's one popular thing to do. So all the Vi items can either be on Vi because she's in the other comp, or on Ambessa. And if you happen to hit Garen and stuff, you could always just play all the Emissary units if you do not have the Enforcer emblem. Then all the Catilyn items can go on Corki and things like that because she uses a bunch of attack damage items. But you could run a lot of different stuff in this build. One augment that I think is really, really fun to use is Martial Law. That's going to be a trait augment with Ambessa and Catilyn. And that's really easy to kind of fit in this comp and just really powerful overall. If you don't get Ambessa, you could also play other forecasts such as Elise or Alawi as like some tankiness or utility to your team, because they're just very solid units overall, and you have Bruiser and Sentinels just right there for the taking. Of course, you could step it up a notch and include the legendaries as well. So you could add in Rumble for Sentinel if you want, and if you have good items for Rumble, you could put the Pit Fighter on Rumble also. And there are kind of a lot of different directions you could go into from there. But this comp, if you haven't noticed yet, a lot of the strong comps that are reliant on forecast units, they have a lot of different legendaries that they could magically fit in. I don't mean magically, but it feels like it's magical because you're like, oh wow, so many 5-cost units fit in this comp. And there's always different ways to get in there. And they also have a bunch of different replacements you could use before you get there. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind whenever you are looking at team comps. Like, a lot of people cook up their own builds, and like those builds work really, really well. I'm not saying they don't, but they might be a little one-dimensional, so that when you don't hit that specific comp, you're kind of screwed and you don't really know what to do. But a lot of times the very popular comps, they have all these like different directions you could take based on what you hit, and that makes them much more rounded. But next comp up we have is Heimerdinger Flex, which is pretty much Academy or Sentinel builds. People either go really heavy into Sentinel or really heavy into Academy, sometimes both. If you get a bunch of emblems, you could do both. You could do like 5 Academy and 6 Sentinel, for example, but it's kind of difficult to fit otherwise. And the decision to play Academy or not is going to be heavily dependent on what Academy items you get, because sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad based on what units you have. Like, if you have ones that are really good for Heimerdinger, like I would definitely go for that because Heimerdinger is going to be the main carry. But if you have some of them that like don't really fit your team that well, like Titan's Resolve I find very awkward because I don't really like it on Jace that much, because most often I put Jace in the back line rather than the front line. It doesn't really fit on the tanks that well. I'd rather have like a real tank item. So sometimes when the item's Titan's Resolve, I don't really go for it in the late game, but in the mid game you could definitely make use of it. But that's kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm choosing between whether to go deep into Academy or not. Sometimes a tank item is really good in the lobby, sometimes it's really horrible, so that's something to consider too. But you could play this with Corki, you could play it without Corki, you could play it with Academy. Like, there's so many different directions to go in this comp. Pretty much you just do a fast 8, roll down, see what 4-cost units you hit, and build around that. And oftentimes it's going to be AP items on Heimerdinger, and then AD items on like Jason, Corki, sometimes even Ezreal. Don't underestimate Ezreal, he's actually a crank. I see my Ezreal out DPSing a lot of my main carries all the time, even with like scuffed items, just because a 2-star 3-cost in stage 4 is going to be solid in most cases. But what I love about this comp is that you can pretty much hard force this most games. There's not really any requirements to go for it. I do prefer having some +1 emblem of like Sentinel, for example, but it's not mandatory by any means. But as long as you hit the units you want, it's going to be pretty decent, as with most comps, right? But I will say, like, only play this comp if you are a little more experienced, because if you're a beginner and you're trying to play a flex comp, you're going to have like an awkward time. I'm not saying you're going to lose or anything. I'm not trying to flame, but it requires more skill than most other comps. Like, if you compare this to the Urgot reroll comp, like Urgot reroll, you just get Sterix Gauge, get Unleash the Beast, and then press the reroll button until you hit Urgot 3, and you're going to do pretty decently. But next up we have is Ambushers. You have Camille reroll and Echo. Both are pretty solid. The reroll one's probably a little more consistent because you only go for it if you have a lot of the units. Just make sure if you do go for the Echo carry that you are able to make it to level 8 very safely, because I've had a ton of games where I play this comp or I watch other people play it and they roll like a ton of gold. They had like 60 gold. I think one of my friends even had like 80 gold to roll down with, and they didn't hit Echo 2 because it was super contested. And that completely kills the comp. You know, it's like you're super reliant on one exact unit, which makes the comp a little inconsistent. That's why this I don't put this in the S tier, because if you don't get that one exact unit, you're pretty screwed. And it's a 4-cost unit. It's not like it's a legendary unit, you know, like some comps, like it's hit or miss on the legendary, which I'm like, okay, whatever, because legendaries are super powerful when you hit them. But 4-cost units, they're supposed to be like standard power level for most boards. So hitting it shouldn't be like that big of a miracle. So just make sure when you do play this comp, not too many people are going that like Zeri Firelight build, or not too many people are going Scrap, because they're going to be taking your Echoes. But for builds like 2-cost reroll for Camille, just do like the Hand of Justice, Titan's Resolve stuff. Edge of Night, also pretty nice. For Echo, Hand of Justice is going to be his best item too. Like, it's just the best item in this Ambusher comp in general, because it gives critical strike chance. And then whatever stat you need. So like Echo likes AP, so just build AP on him. But all like melee frontline items work on him. After that, complement the comp with like Firelights or Watchers, or just random units that kind of fill in random synergies. That's always going to be a good choice. Like in this one, we added in Garen for Watcher. He's just a solid unit, and Scar's a Firelight. So that makes perfect sense, right? But next build up we have is Dominators. Emblem, no emblem, both work. 6 Dominator, 4 Dominator, both work. It's just really like a Mundo lottery. If you get Mundo, the comp's going to be really good. And then if you get 1-star Mordekaiser, you're going to probably go like top 3. But there are going to be a lot of games where you're not able to hit the Mundo, because a lot of other Twitch players are going for this. So one important note, and I think this is going to be one of the best tips of the day, is that when you are scouting in the early game to find out who's contesting you, sometimes people look around and you're like, oh, I'm going AP because I'm Dominators. I have like a Spear of Shojin and like a Rod that I could use to build like a Morello or like some AP item. And then you scout around, you see a bunch of people, they're going attack damage, and you're like, oh, that's great. I can go this Dominator comp and be uncontested. So in most cases that would be true, but a lot of the attack damage players who built like Rageblade are going to be taking your Mundos because they're just going Twitch anyways. So you have to watch out for that when scouting sometimes, and something that might seem good might not actually be, because they're still taking your same units. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you're playing this comp. Other than that, I have a 3-hour guide on this, so check that out if you have not already. Zoe Sorcerer, this one's going to be the next comp up. It's just another emblem comp. If you get the emblem, you could play it. Just play all the units in the trait, and there's not really anything too complicated about that. One random tech that I like is putting the anomaly on my Swain as like a tank anomaly. I like having him even as a 3-cost 2-star with the anomaly, because there aren't any good tanks in this comp, so you're a little over-reliant on him. But after that, like Zoe, main item holder, LeBlanc, late game insurance, and whoever's holding the emblem, some legendary that could use AP is going to be great. So that could be Mordekaiser, that could be like Rumble, a lot of different units. You know what the best way to find out who holds Sorcerer emblem the best? Well, you could go to the Explorer tool, put in 8 Sorcerer, have Sorcerer emblem up, go to items, and then click on champion specific stats, and then you can see who most commonly holds the Sorcerer emblem. So most of the time it's going to be Elise, but there are other times where it's other units where the average placement is going to be a bit better. So Elise is by far the most popular. This is in Plat Plus, by the way. You could change the ranking however you want. And then you can see that obviously, to no surprise, like Mel is really good with this, Mordekaiser really good with this. So you can kind of look and see who you can put this item on to get like maximum results. But overall, very nice tool. But looking at the legendary units, we have Mordekaiser, Rumble, Malzahar, all using it. If you want to get like very specific, you could even add in the exact champions in your team and then see what legendary unit complements that the most. Like you could add all these at the top, for example, or maybe you're running like a random thing down here, and just pretty much customize the data however you want. But next build up we have is Rebel Zoe. This comp definitely fell out of favor. I don't like it as much anymore, because Rebel was always inconsistent, and now other people are taking your units. Like everyone is playing Alawi. It's pretty much like Pokemon cards at Costco. Like you're not gonna find an Alawi because everyone likes her and she's very powerful. More people are taking Jinx because people are going Ambushers, so that's a little bit harder to hit. People are taking Zoe because they're playing Sorcerers now sometimes, so it could be harder to get that. Echo is taken from all the Scrap and Firelight and Ambusher builds, so this comp is a lot harder to play now compared to the previous patch. So if you were playing this to great success last patch and you're like, wait a minute, now it's not working as well anymore, even though they didn't really change it, the reason why is because it's more contested now. So be very careful when playing this comp. Scout around and only go for this if you get like an insane start for it, but it is really strong if you do. Next build up, we have Emissary, Corki, and Ambessa. My favorite comp probably of this set. I love the Emissary concept. It was like ninjas before, but now it's called Emissary, where if you have like 1 or 4 of the trait, it works, but nothing else. And this first version is going to be my favorite. Just because it doesn't use any legendary units, but you destroy a lot of comps that do use a lot of legendary units, oddly enough. I'm pretty sure whenever I 2-starred everything in this comp, like, I've always done really, really well. I know that's like a huge ask because I'm playing 4 4-cost units, but like, considering it has no legendaries, like, I could also say like, oh, I have like a 2-star Mordekaiser and Dominators. Like, that doesn't mean I always win, right? But I'm pretty sure if I like get this full board 2-star without taking like triple econ augments, for example, because obviously if you take econ augments, it's easier to hit. Maybe just 1 econ augment. Like, it always does really, really well. Like, it's absolutely nuts. But that's obviously hard to do because you're looking for pretty specific units. This comp is really, really good with stuff like Bronze for Life. You could also play it with Rumble. If you hit a Rumble, you play Vladimir instead of some of the other units we saw before, plus the Rel. Sentinel version also is there with Corki. If you don't want to play the Emissary stuff, because this kind of is like a Corki flex in some cases. And then obviously in early game, just find like any frontline, backline combo. It could be like Sentinels, Bruisers in the front line, Watchers, Artillerists, Pit Fighter in the back line, Snipers, lots of different options there. But the most important thing with this comp is just the ability to fast 8, because you need a ton of money to hit this comp, even though it looks kind of cheap. But the next build up we have is Quick Striker Nocturne. This one is going to be only played if you get artifact items. If we look at the Explorer again, you'll see that items on Nocturne, the really good ones, like the ones that actually improve his average placement a lot, like he has that 3.92 right now, like IE is good, 3.74, but like the artifact items are really what boosts him up, like 3.25, 3.33, 3.14, really nice stuff. You might be thinking like, hey, wouldn't every unit be better with artifact items? That's not necessarily true, because when you do get an artifact item, you're trading it for something else, or like other people are also getting that same artifact item. So if you look at maybe a different unit, let's say like Heimerdinger, I don't think he's that great with artifact items, and we'll see right here if we change it to the same thing, like he's at a 4.38, but like a lot of these artifact items actually make him worse. It's not that the items are worse, it's mainly because he just doesn't use them as well as other units. You always have to think of gaining an advantage in TFT as like an opportunity cost, or like every time you get an opportunity to make your team stronger, like other people do too. Like if you had a silver augment game versus a prismatic augment game, of course the prismatic augment game is going to be much more powerful on like board strength compared to the silver game, right? But that doesn't mean the stuff you get from the prismatic augments are always going to be better on like whatever team you're running, because there's always a cost because everyone else is getting it too. So you have to be better than the other people in that specific game. So that's one way to look at artifact items. Like certain units just use them much better than others. And Nocturne is one great example for that. So I would not play him without it. And then you just play Automatas and Quick Strikers, as many as you can, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Very easy comp to play. Next one up, we have his Form Swapper Gangplank, just generic like reroll build. If you do get the Jace, he's going to be very crucial to your team. But if I have a 2-star Gangplank item holder in the early game, which I often do, early to mid game, let's say you're stage 4-1, and then I'm doing a roll down on level 8, maybe I'm going for a Corki build like Corki Ambessa, and then I hit a random Jace, neurons activate in my brain, right? And I'm like, maybe I could go a 4-form swapper build. So sometimes I might hold on to the Jace and go for that instead. So like sometimes you hit the Garen and you can go for Emissary builds. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you hit a random Jace when you have Gangplank already and you're like, oh, I just need to find Swain and then Elise, and then I'm gonna have like a very, very good comp. So play this comp situationally, do not hard force it, but after that you could just roll for your Gangplank. Zeri ReRoll is going to be the new comp of the week. It's pretty much like, some people might look at this and recognize it immediately. It's pretty much the same thing as the Kogmaw Watcher build with Firelight, and that is true. It is the same comp. However, instead of 3-star Kogmaw, you're going for 3-star Zeri. You still want the Scar though, because he's going to be the best tank. Firelight tanking is just like maybe one of the best tank traits I've seen, which is weird because it doesn't like seem like a tank trait because like Echo and Zeri are not tanks. But putting Firelight Emblem on Garen just makes him live so long. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. It's because the numbers make it so that he does. But in this build, you focus on Scar and Zeri. 3 damage items on Zeri. I like the Rage Blade IE combo. Third item can be like second Rage Blade, Gunblade, things like that. Those are going to be the preferred. Scar just wants generic tank items. Warmogs, Bramble Vest, Dragonclaw, Redemption, Sunfire Cape. Like literally anything works on him. Garen really likes Warmog so that he could give his Emissary buff to the adjacent units. Firelight Emblem plus whatever tank items you can get. Some people like itemizing Echo. I really don't. I don't think he works that well in this comp. He's just there to provide more Firelight to make Scar more tanky. But if you do have like a random item in the late game, like yeah, you could put it on him. Alternatively, you could also reroll for Kogmaw 3 as you are going for the Scar. But only do this if you have a lot of gold. Like if you have a reroll augment such as Prismatic Ticket or something crazy like that, Rig Shop, then yeah, you could go for Kogmaw 3. And then you would want to put like a few items on him. Just remember that like Zeri's going to be doing most of the carrying. So I wouldn't worry about that in most games. Only in games where you have insane econ or an augment that allows you to get it very easily. But overall, like I'd rate this comp as like, it's in the A tier. It's definitely playable, but I just wouldn't grief my game to like hard force this because it's new. A lot of people, when there is a new comp, they just like to go for it no matter what. And like, yeah, sure, do that because it's fun, right? But if you're trying to climb like for real, only go for this situationally, even though it is very playable. So what are those situations? First, it has to be uncontested. And then second, I really like only doing this if I get +1 Firelight or a Watcher, because it just really, really makes the game easier if you could go 6 Watcher or like 4 Firelight. I've heard Anger Issues is really good too. I've seen some people play it. It looks really nice. Like Anger Issues on Zeri and Kogmaw goes absolutely wild. Too Much Value is another really cool augment that you could kind of try on this. But apart from that, like, yeah, I wouldn't go for this unless I had like a billion Zeris on my board before I'm even considering going for it without any of the other conditions met. But full instructions are going to be down here again, all on the website, bunnymuffins.lol. Next up, we have our kind of like the other like niche builds. We don't really need to go over them too much because we're probably not going to be playing them that much. So going back up at the top, I guess we could talk about Chem Baron because I did update this one a little bit in terms of where it is on the tier list. But 7 Chem Baron, good. Playing 5 cost, good. It did get nerfed, but it's still very good if you're able to get the cash out. Like 400 or 500 is going to be good. I'm leaning more towards 500. I wouldn't go for this otherwise. So I would only play this personally if I get some insane Chem Baron start. But if you played this a lot on the last patch and you're like really practiced on it, then you could get away with keep playing it. But if that's not you, if you've like never played this comp before and you're like, oh, I heard it's good because I saw it on Bunny Muffin's YouTube channel, I would not just like auto play it, you know, like I'd only play it with like an insane start because it does take some skill to play because you can't lose too much life in the early game. A lot of people think like, oh, I just like perma open fort and then they like die before they get their cash out, or they like don't kill enough units, and even though they do get their cash out, they face the one person with like 3-star 4 costs and get kicked out of the game, or whatever nonsense people are high rolling nowadays. So keep that in mind before going Chem Baron. Like, it's really fun to play, don't get me wrong, but if you're trying to climb, which I assume most people are if they are looking up videos on YouTube on TFT, you need to pick your spots and also stick to what you know. That's like the best advice that anyone can ever receive. But now let's go into the comment of the week. The first one is, hey Bunny Muffins, I've been watching for a while now. I'm pretty much hard stuck in Plat. I can usually get to Plat 1, but not further. I find that in a lot of games, I'm forced to pivot because for whatever reason, I'm contested frequently and pivot in favor of doing better with an uncontested comp. Is it better just to contest them back or play uncontested and try to pivot more effectively? So that's going to depend on what type of comp you're playing. If you're playing like a 4-cost comp like Twitch, Corki, things like that, like it's okay to be contested. Like one other person going for it, even 2 other people going for it. If the comp is like really, really OP in the meta, it's okay to do. Like some metas, like the 1-star 4 cost is enough. I'd say right now, like Twitch isn't that good. Like he's good, but he's not like insane good. So if there's one other person going for it, like sure, whatever. If there are 2 other people going for it, make sure you have a better setup than them, because there's always going to be one odd man out, and oftentimes the person with the worst setup for it is going to be that person. It's their job to pivot, not yours. However, if you're playing a reroll comp such as Urgot and Tristana, or like Camille Ambushers, like you really have to make sure that you have an absolutely insane start. Like if you have Unleash the Beast Urgot and someone else as like 3 Urgots, you could still go for this Urgot reroll because you just have a better setup than them. So the same rule kind of applies there, and it's their job to pivot, not yours. But if you're the person with like a 2-star Urgot and someone else has Unleashed the Beast and they're going for Urgot, they have like an Urgot 1 on their board, you probably have to pivot. But the good news is that you're not in that much danger because you have an Urgot 2 already, and you could just use that as an item holder for literally anything in the game and go into a different comp. For example, if you have like Titan's Resolve on your Urgot, you could easily go into like some Vi build, some Ambessa build, things like that, and just use the Urgot as an item holder. But if you're pivoting just for the purpose of pivoting, make sure whatever you are pivoting to, you have some sort of setup for. I know a lot of people, they pivot into a different comp because it's uncontested. Like let's say you're wanting to go Twitch and you're like, everyone's going Twitch, I can't do that. But then you pivot to like Dominators or something like that. Like why would you pivot to Dominators? You would only do that if you have like items that could kind of fit that build, right? If you have a bunch of attack damage items and then you pivot into like an AP build, or if you have like no units of the Dominators to begin with, probably not the best thing to go for. So make sure you actually have a setup that can actually reach that pivot. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video. I'll see you all next time.